Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome to this Labor Day edition of Law and Legitimacy. And if you're not working, we want to know why. It's Labor Day. We're supposed to celebrate the dignity of labor by actually engaging in labor. I've been in the office for a couple hours already working on some briefs. It's going to be that kind of week for me. I'm back from the swamp, back in New Haven right now. But unfortunately, Thursday, I got to head back down. I got a change of plea for another person involved in a January 6th case, Douglas Wyatt, on Friday, and Owen Schroyer of InfoWars will be sentenced on Tuesday for his role in the festivities. So I'll likely spend the weekend down in D.C. rather than travel back and forth and become a D.C. commuter. I'm going to pack up a certiorari petition that I'm working on for the U.S. Supreme Court. And here's the question. Here's the question we're going to be presenting. The Supreme Court has yet ever to rule on whether arguable probable cause is a sufficient ground to grant qualified immunity. The court obviously has endorsed qualified immunity, but some of the appellate courts, in fact, all of the appellate courts, I checked yesterday, and all 11 circuit courts of appeals, plus the DC circuit, are granting qualified immunity on the theory that it is arguably, that probable cause is arguably present for an arrest or a search and seizure. What does that mean? It means it wasn't there in the first place, and you shouldn't have been granting qualified immunity. When something is arguably present, it's sort of like arguing the spirit of the law. Well, that's not what it says, but we know what it means. And, you know, the problem with that is you get to a vanishing point where what is supposedly a qualified immunity, and an immunity that is only granted in specified circumstances, is granted in virtually every circumstance, or at least in those circumstances that the law or judges deign to grant it in. It's an uphill struggle, but, you know, what else is new in my life? Hey, so speaking of struggles, how many of you
before you go, hold on. Go, Owen Schroyer, what was he convicted of, Norm, that he's going to be sentenced for this week?
I mean, next week. It's basically a misdemeanor being present on the Capitol grounds.
Okay, got it. Because that was a prosecution that began much earlier, if my memory serves, than many of the ones that have become sort of dominant in the news cycle.
Yeah, no, the Schroyer prosecution has been under the radar, and we've tried to keep it that way. I'm even reluctant to talk about it now, but there it is. Owen is the afternoon personality on InfoWars, the Alex Jones production out of Austin, Texas. And Owen's case is complicated by the fact that earlier, prior to January 6th, he had been present at an impeachment hearing, in a House impeachment hearing, and he stormed the dais. In other words, he went from the audience and walked toward the dais, protesting that Nadler was himself a crook. He was arrested for this and charged with interfering with Congress. We entered a diversionary agreement, what's called, wherein if he satisfied the terms of his diversionary program, the charge would be dismissed. One was that he not step foot on Capitol grounds. Well, there he was on January 6th as a journalist accompanying Alex Jones. They entered Capitol grounds while Jones stood by and encouraged people to leave the area so as not to engage in violence and give the left what they so dearly wanted. That is a pretext to prosecute people in an effort to stifle dissent, which is precisely what's happening. So quick update on developments in the Proud Boys case since we last spoke Friday morning. On Friday, two more Proud Boys were sentenced. Dominic Pizzola and Ethan Nordine. Dominic Pizzola was one of the only one of the five Proud Boys prosecuted to win an acquittal on seditious conspiracy. That is, he was not convicted of that, but he's the fellow that took a shield from a law enforcement officer and used it to break a window. The court calculated his sentence, applying the terrorism enhancement, but sentencing him to only 10 years, which was surprising. I would have thought that the violence directed against the physical property might have supported a larger sentence, but I was also delighted. Dom surprised people at sentencing. This has been the talk of the internet over the weekend, at least in some circles, while expressing remorse while standing at the podium for his actions and for the consequences for his family. After the judge left the bench and as Dom was being led from the courtroom, he's reported to have stood, faced the crowd, raised this and said, Trump won, and you all know it. And so courtroom sketch artists have produced that, and Dom has been the talk of the airwaves. In the afternoon, Ethan Nordine was sentenced, and he drew the stiffest sentence of any of the Proud Boys thus far, 18 years, putting him neck and neck, or tying, as it were, with Stuart Rhodes, the leader of the Oath Keepers, for the longest sentence imposed on a Proud Boy. Nordine himself also expressed reservations about his role in the conduct that day, but Judge Kelly wasn't having any of it. It was far less than the 33 years that prosecutors sought. Prosecutors continue to basically be humiliated in this case by achieving far less than they are seeking. And it raises a question about what's going on in Merrick Garland's shop. I mean, a prosecutor's role is to do justice, not simply to win, not simply to make points. And consistently throughout each and every high-profile January 6th prosecution that resulted in a conviction after trial, they have sought sentences well in excess of anything a judge has been willing to impose. Most people, what's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over again, even after you fail, and hoping the results will change. The prosecutor is behaving like an insane, jilted lover in this case, and it needs to understand that the American people aren't in love with the Justice Department. So, 4 Proud Boys sentenced. In each instance, the government sentencing the individual the court sentencing the individual Proud Boy to far less than the government sought. The last sentencing will take place on Tuesday at 2. And Enrique Tarrio, the leader of the Proud Boys, the national chairman of the group, will be sentenced. He's represented by Sabino Jauregui of Miami, together with Naib Hassan. They've got an uphill fight. I expect a sentence in the range of 20 to 22 years for Mr. Tarrio. And what's surprising about this is, that the Proud Boys never brought weapons or guns to the Capitol. They never had a plan to use them. Indeed, the prosecution produced no evidence of a plan whatsoever. Prosecutor Connor Mulrow argued in front of the jury at closing arguments that you don't have to have a plan. There could be an implicit understanding to be a co-conspirator, and that implicit understanding might be evident at the moment you choose to act. That is, even after the first breach of the Capitol. In the absence of a plan, it's hard to see how this is called the sedition. It's hard to see how people have over interpreted this to call it a coup attempt, this, that, and everything else. It was no such thing. It was a riot gone bad. The government's overcharged. It's seeking to over-sentence, and the courts are standing back. Let's see what happens to Enrique, though. How it is that a group without a plan, a group without guns, gets sentenced more significantly than the Oath Keepers is who had weapons present, who had guns stored in Virginia, who were prepared to, and had a boat that they had used for the obtained for the occasion, were prepared to move the guns across the Potomac into D.C. on command, and didn't. How it is that the Proud Boys end up more culpable, deserving of more punishment in Judge Kelly's or in judges' eyes generally, is a mystery that will have to be unpacked perhaps on appeal. It occurred to me over the weekend that the best thing that could happen in this country is that there be a commutation drive on behalf of the Proud Boys, and that is that petitions be circulated asking President Biden or the next occupant of the White House, whoever it may be, to commute the sentences of these men. That is, to set them free. One need not pardon them. One can give the Justice Department the conviction it so desperately wants, and has so desperately obtained at great cost of confidence of the American people in the Justice Department, but also realize that 3, 4, 5 years behind bars is more than enough to satisfy the requirements of justice. Let's commute these guys. Let's begin the process of a national conversation that's devoted, if not toward healing, at least to learning to live together. The January 6th prosecutions are rapidly becoming a Waco moment in American history, or put another way, a wacko moment. The Justice Department is unhinged, led by Merrick Garland. They're seeking through vengeance to stifle an episodic act of violence that did briefly delay the counting of electoral votes, but it posed no threat to our democracy. Our institutions weren't imperiled. Basically, a boil popped, And it's Ben Lanston. It's time to heal and try to look for a happier, sunnier disposition and complexion in American life. Enough said about the Proud Boys.
Yeah, I was going to say, how busy were you this weekend with media inquiries and interviews and that kind of thing?
I wasn't. I mean, I could have done a bunch. CNN flirted with me a couple times. They wanted me on Thursday, but I didn't want to stay up late. Then they promised to come to my New Haven office on Friday, and then they jilted me at the end. I'm deciding to cancel the Proud Boys story in favor of stories about an escaped inmate in Pennsylvania. I suspect the phones might ring a little bit tomorrow when Mr. Tarrio is sentenced. But, you know, I'm a practicing lawyer. I got briefs to write. I'm not diving after every camera. I've done that in the past. No need to do it anymore.
Well, let's move on.
Yeah. So I don't know about you. All was right in the world this weekend. College football's back.
Yeah, it certainly felt good. The weather was beautiful here in North Carolina this weekend, and the slate of games on Saturday did not disappoint. And what I guess we'll lead with this story. I missed it, and I actually didn't catch this story until Saturday when all of the college football fanfare was peaking in advance of those noon kickoff games. But the ACC, so we talked on the stream in previous weeks about conference realignments all over the country, and the ACC appeared in the wake of some of the realignments, and one of the realignments was actually catalyzed by one Colorado actually joining. I think it's the Big 12 or the Big.
Let me cut right to the chase. Did the Atlantic Conference really offer, and did Stanford accept a spot in the Atlantic Conference?
Yes.
Is Palo Alto looking Palo Alto overlooking the Pacific Ocean is now part of the Atlantic Conference.
Yeah. So this is from.
I just get stuck on stuff like this.
It's just doesn't make any sense. Observer. Yeah. Well, I mean, reconcile this. It's not only Stanford, but it's also UCal, right? So the ACC approved Friday the addition of California, Stanford, and SMU. So that's Southern Methodist University there in Texas for the 2024 season in a controversial turn of events. For weeks, it appeared the much talked about expansion wouldn't happen after the league lacked the 12 necessary votes needed for approval from the league's 15 presidents and chancellors. NC State joined North Carolina, Clemson, and Florida State in opposing the move during league conversations earlier in August. But when final votes were taken during a call Friday morning, expansion was approved in what ACC Commissioner Jim Phillips called a, quote, transformational day for the league. And so now the criticism is going to be of NC State for being the vote that flipped. And as an NC State alum, I can only hope that we actually got something good in exchange for flipping that vote. Otherwise, turning a back on the likes of North Carolina, Clemson, and Florida State, who happen to be the most valuable brands of college sports in the ACC. Right.
With respect to Clemson, one of the most valuable brands in the nation. I mean, what's up with,
So I'm curious to figure out how that works. I think I sent you an article, Norm, from Paul Feinbaum, who essentially is saying that this is the beginning of the end for the ACC because of that. I've got that here on the screen. Paul Feinbaum congratulates ACC for essentially leading to its own demise with Cal, Stanford, SMU additions. I mean, at the top, I know that this sounds trite, but it's the Coast Conference, and we have just added 2 West Coast schools and a school from Texas.
Well, I mean, here's the thing this is a confession of geriatric incompetence. I follow college football the way I follow a lot of sports. It brings back pleasant memories of when I was a kid and would obsess over this. But, I've now raised a family. I'm a grandparent 5 times over, trying to figure out how to incorporate all these little new rugrats into my life. And I don't have a lot of time to look back and reassess fundamentals. So when I go back to follow a new season, I'm looking for stable landmarks. And the NCAA is blowing up brand loyalty by mixing and matching these conferences in ways that are easy to ridicule. You don't put Stanford in the Atlantic Conference. That's a stupid move. But once you've made it, fans like me have to wonder, is it really worth all the effort to reconfigure the new conference structure? I mean, for example, I was pissed off this weekend when I learned that they had adopted a speed up the clock set of rules in the NCAA. A purist knew this was coming for a long time. I wasn't paying attention. And I'm thinking, these games, they don't last too long as far as I'm concerned. So the new rule requires that the clock move up until the last 2 minutes of each half. You don't get an incomplete pass doesn't stop the clock. Going out of bounds doesn't stop the clock. And so the game is supposed to move quicker. I wondered whether it would depress scores. Apparently not. I mean, if you look at what Oklahoma, who was it? Was it Oklahoma who scored 83 points?
Maybe.
I can't remember who it was.
81, right?
81, and then we had a couple of games in the 70s, many games in the 50s and 60s. And so apparently teams can still find a way to pile points on. I mean, Texas A&M had a 35-point second quarter. I don't know what happened there. I mean, apparently the team just exploded. As to the teams I care about, Michigan and Ohio State, they both looked flat this weekend. I thought Michigan's run game was stale. The offensive line, much touted, really couldn't control the game. And while Blake Corum was back and looked healthy, he had a lethargic 77 yards on 11 carries. Now you're saying, hey, that's 7 yards a carry. Who's to complain? But there was one or two big runs, and he got stuffed at the line of scrimmage any number of times, including a fourth and a couple fourth down conversions. So the Bleacher Report was charitable to Michigan after its weekend performance. It kept them rated number 2. It was uncharitable to Ohio State, which also looked a little flat. Michigan won 30-3. Michigan fans, by the way, and I'm one of them, stop whining about a late field goal. The other team didn't want to get shut out, so they put 3 points on the board. You would think the Big House had been bombed based on the reaction. Oh, look at them. They're probably laughing all the way home. No, maybe they were showing a little pride and they didn't want a goose egg on the board. College football is a form of warfare. You each play as a battle, and the goal is to get the best result at each battle. They got 3 points. Deal with it. Ohio State had a similar performance, though, a similarly flat performance, 23-3. They slipped to 12. So I don't know what's going to happen in the AP and coaches poll on Tuesday. It's early. These polls don't mean a lot.
Well, the bigger issue to me, Norm, if we're looking at the NCAA, and I look at college sports, but college football, because of how big it's a behemoth in terms of revenue driver for all of these universities and for the NCAA. We're in a world now where media rights dominates the conversation, right? These realignments are driven primarily and almost exclusively by the future of revenues to be generated by the league based on media and broadcast revenues. Right. And how the teams that participate in these power conferences are going to participate in the revenue share. That's how we get something like the ACC in a bastardized version, adding 2 West Coast teams. But I think to your point about the NCAA and what it's doing with this, I do question how much control the NCAA actually has over what these conferences are ultimately doing. And if it does have control, it certainly isn't exercising it, because it appears as though if these conferences are winning on higher revenue and earnings potential, that the NCAA somehow shares in that revenue and profit sharing, and thus kind of answers the question as to what it's doing. But in terms of the product in the field, what you just described is kind of a desperate situation for the product of college football from the fan perspective, because it doesn't appear as though anyone in these institutions or in the NCAA is thinking about that from the perspective of the consumer, from the fan. And this is sort of a Sherman.
That's right.
So this is sort of a Sherman Act approach to the conversation. And just let me finish this one point, and then I'll turn it back to you. But when I think about what the NCAA has done with speeding up the clock, but then you contrast that with the additional rules, very much like the NFL, the additional rules that is really pushing the defense into an untenable position, right? It's more about how long can you resist the score rather than how long can you stop the score because of player safety. The NCAA has allowed player safety issues to turn into something that is a bit of an opaque black box. And because of that opacity, it allows these teams, it allows them to really incentivize higher scoring games, because people, that's what people appear to like more about sports. The casual fan likes higher scoring games because that's the dopamine rush that you get from watching these things. And if that's the case, that's not a long-term sustainable strategy. Like you said, we can't have teams putting up 81 points and albeit it's opening weekend, so I don't want to overreact. But the problem is simply this: football is a very specific sport. It's a combat sport. It's violent, and it's a game of leverage, right? At all points. And when one side of the ball is inhibited to the benefit of the other systemically by virtue of the rules and implementation and application of those rules, it's only going to be a matter of time before there has to be another revolutionary switch. So now we've got issues with the transfer portal. We've got issues with conferences becoming bloated and overweight in terms of how many teams are in them. They don't even really resonate with locals anymore in terms of regional specific sports and fandom. And that's a problem, because if you take away the foundation of community in these sports, in college sports, you're left with something that's nothing more than an amateur league, right? And people just going to shift their focus to something like the NFL, which is still very regional and local.
Final point on the NCAA: if you're a Michigan fan, cancel your subscription to Peacock first thing this morning. Look, Michigan's a national brand, and Peacock, I think, and NBC think they got away with something. They managed to put the game behind a paywall so that you had to subscribe to watch the Michigan game. I think the least expensive subscription was $5.99. I didn't realize you were going to have to do that until just before the game. Now, and so I noted a Michigan wit saying Michigan fans dump Peacock. I mean, this is like another revenue grab by the networks rather than having these things on general media. Are they now hunting for premium games to make subscribers pay, knowing full well that they did? All right, Peacock, you got my $5.99 for the month of September, and you got Michigan apparently next weekend. But guess what? I get to watch it for the same $5.99. I've already canceled my subscription. If you're an NCAA football fan, cancel your subscription to Peacock.
Well, and I did see some rumblings about Disney, I believe, shopping ESPN as a platform, and that Amazon may be a willing and suitable buyer for ESPN. Amazon has been really pushing into the live sports streaming market, especially in professional sports, NFL in particular, over the last several years. So it will be interesting to see how that plays out. But I think that, a lot of these places are struggling, right? These contracts are just so top heavy. And again, I have to just harp on this. No one is really thinking about what this means for the only thing that matters, which is the customer, right? The fan.
So I think we're going to spend the rest of the day talking sports related topics. We were trying to pivot, but Mike puts up the Deion Sanders.
This is a way to get back to law topics.
No, and I mean, look, this was huge. I wish I had seen that game. It's almost the feel-good story of the season. Deion Sanders comes back from the NFL. He's coached prime time. He's taking a struggling program.
No, not from the NFL. This is Deion Sanders. He came from Jackson State University.
Sorry about that. No, I mean, but he was a football phenom. But he comes to Colorado. And his son is the quarterback, and he's playing TCU, which made it to the national championship last year, humiliating Michigan. Of course, the Horned Frogs. I'll never get over that. But there they are. Colorado, I think 1-11 last year. Deion's son is at quarterback. Mike, what happened?
Well, I'm in on the Deion Sanders narrative. I've been watching Deion raise his profile over the last several years when he began really appearing on things like Barstool Sports, right? The Dave Portnoy platform that has been in Imperious. We see this one, the Barstool Sports platform that has really risen to prominence. Dave Portnoy has sold it twice, right? Bought it back for $1. But Deion Sanders over the last several years have been doing some sort of media blitz. And I don't want to say that it's ultra intentional, but I also don't want to take anything away from sort of the long game that I know he's likely playing. Deion has said a lot, right? When he made the move from Jackson State University, which is an HBCU that was not on the map at all, he changed the culture there, changed the recruiting class, and then the opportunity at Colorado came around. I remember sending stuff to you, Norm, when I said I'm so in on what Deion is saying from a message perspective, right? Merit, accountability, leadership, morals, right? He's talking to young men. He's a leader of young men. And this is a guy who's done it at the highest level in 2 professional sports, right? We're not talking about a guy that just ran a 4.25 40 and was a good cornerback in the NFL. This guy is all pro, right? one of the best shit talkers in history, and one of the guys that backed it up the most. Right, he played baseball at the same time as he was playing NFL football. So he was in the major leagues at the same time, on a roster at the same time as he was playing NFL football. One of the first people to ever really put pressure on those. So this guy is the ultimate competitor, and he has a son, Shadur Sanders, who plays quarterback, not cornerback, not a defensive back, who plays quarterback. And he has been playing quarterback at Jackson State for the last couple of years. He came with his dad to Boulder, to Colorado, and started his first game as a D1 in a D1 conference against the runner-up from last year, TCU, and threw for over 400 yards and 500 yards and 4 touchdowns yesterday in his debut game. And what I said to you, Norm, was that what a signature win for Deion Sanders in this program, and what a signature win for those of us who know this to be the real playbook, right? What Deion Sanders is articulating and communicating to young men. What a win for everyone from that perspective. I'm heartened to see it. I have a soft spot for the fact that it's a father and son tandem. I think it's inspiring from that perspective as well. I think that all fathers are gonna look at this story and say, man, that doesn't get any better.
Deion was a class act at the press conference afterwards. He described the game and described the accomplishments of his quarterback and said, who also happens to be my son, and did it without tears. But you could sense the emotion and the resonance and how it caught in his throat. And you thought for a moment, Deion, Shadur, these are heroes in the making.
Well, and Don makes this point, which thank you for making this point, Don. Deion gives credit to God. That will irritate some people. I don't think it's going to matter. This is why I'm so heartened by this story. I think that for as flashy as Deion is, he is also a man cut of a certain fabric, and he is from a certain specific point in American history. And he's done things and he has won at the highest level. I love that he is as outspoken and as morally centered, apparently, as he ultimately is. So I'm looking forward to this. I actually think that Colorado might not make the kind of noise that it wants to this year. This win will set the recruiting class for this school for the next 4 or 5 years on its own. What Deion has done to culminate in this opening day win against a ranked opponent of the caliber of TCU is going to set the stage for Colorado to be a real player. And that's a credit to Deion. I look forward. Maybe we're going to return to real football.
Yeah, I hope so.
I guess, but with that, Norm, I said I had an idea this morning, and we got just a couple of minutes left. So I do want to change this back into some law. But I think this is a signature win for head coach Deion Sanders, and it just made me think of what is a signature win for you and for me, Norm, that we can share with our listeners. And I'm glad to go first, or I'll give.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I'll bring this up on the on the screen. When we talk about what a signature win is, I think a signature win is sort of the essence of that underlying skill set or talent stack or group of salient attributes of an individual, right? What does it mean to win in signature fashion? And that my firm is called Carolina Craft Legal. We were built, directly out of law school. We are a sort of a beverage alcohol regulatory. I hesitate to use the S word, Norm, specialist, just for ethical reasons. But if there were some sort of specialization to be declared in this field, there's no doubt that my partner and I would be among the elite in this field. But you wouldn't know it because we are just a two-man shop. We're in our, early 30s. We've done this from the ground up, and we're busy working. I came into contact with one Mark Randazza, First Amendment attorney, and it was through pure chance that his client was Flying Dog. Flying Dog is a well-renowned brewery out of Maryland, big First Amendment advocate, free speech advocate, and they were trying to get a product, the one that I have there on the screen, Freeze and Season Winter Ale, into North Carolina. And every out-of-state product that comes into the state has to have a federal approval and a state level approval in order to lawfully turn that product over to wholesalers, which as an out-of-state entity, you're required to go through independent licensed wholesalers to get your product to market in North Carolina, like many other states. Mark did a simple search on the web and found me because Flying Dog had been denied approval of the label that you see in front of you for this product. And if you know beer the way I do as a business, this is not a, many people think of craft beer and they think small and local and easy to pivot, right? I think that that what would be helpful is for people to start thinking of the bigger breweries as very sophisticated entities with very long value chains. So for a brand as storied and as big as Flying Dog to have allocated production, bottles, marketing, labels, labor, etc., to this product months and months and months in advance, and then only to be told by a state like North Carolina that in the face of its federal approval on this product that it still wasn't good enough for the state of North Carolina, that represents a real material harm. And Mark found me and asked if I would care to be local counsel on this case. We won. We changed the law. We beat the NCABC, the North Carolina Alcoholic Beverage Commission, in federal court on First Amendment grounds, declaring the rule that they used to declare this label, in bad taste, unconstitutional for purposes of the First Amendment. For me, that was our signature win. That was my practice using our core competency that was very hard earned and very technical, as you could probably hear, because I go a mile a minute when I start talking about this stuff. But to be in federal court on a First Amendment issue for something like beer, right? And then to be victorious over the agency that we know had done wrong, that was our signature win. That was our Deion Sanders, against TCU game.
Well, there you go. And have people
probably in the first of an era, right? I should add that this was what sort of unlocked the recognition of us in this field.
That's why I think that's the other thing about a signature win. It's it bears your imprimatur, and people know how to find you. They know what to expect of you. When you raised this topic, I had to think back. It's been a long career, 30 some years, but I think the first one that at least attracted national attention was the Kevin King case. My client had faced the death penalty by Connecticut for the rape and murder of his girlfriend one Christmas season as she babysat her toddler sister. The state failed to get the death penalty, and Mr. King was housed at a community correctional center. He was getting ready to be moved to the Supermax, and he realized he had one last chance to escape. So he lured a guard into his cell, persuaded the guard at shank point to relinquish her uniform, tied her up, stabbed her in the chest, put the uniform on, and started to try to walk out of the facility. He made it past a couple checkpoints, but not past the last. Guards spotted him, ran him down the hall, pushed him to the ground where he stabbed himself, where he fell on his shank, narrowly missing his heart. And as he lay on the ground, the guards beat him up. So I didn't have him at that level of the proceedings. The public defender's office called me, said, would you bring a 1983 action? Would you sue in federal court, suing the guards for the beating they imposed on that man? And of course I said yes. And we won an enormous verdict in his case of $2.1 million. And many people thought, they should have beat him to death. But our argument to the jury was and remains that equal protection of the law means that even the least among us are entitled to the most protection that the law can offer. And when guards behave like the men they're trying to protect us from in a prison, something is fundamentally wrong. And the jury agreed. It was a very courageous jury. The verdict was returned in 1999. And, so for me, that's a victory I will always remember. It probably bears a far longer story, but we're over time today now. And so maybe we'll talk about it at greater detail elsewhere. But I think the point of Mike's and my story is, find something you do and then do it. And when you win, talk about it, because you should be proud of the times in which you took a risk against all odds and defeated when David defeats Goliath. So congratulations to Deion Sanders, Colorado. Congratulations to you, Mike. Hey, don't we have a big event coming up
we absolutely
at lunchtime? And do we need to make that announcement?
We absolutely do. So I'll throw this on the screen as well. Law and Legitimacy. We have filled out the entire roster. I think I'm going to change my name to what is it? I don't know. I had another idea this morning. Anyway, we have our full 12-person league filled out. Everybody has finally gotten in, and thank you to one Will Atkinson for his persistence this week. I kept having to go round and round and round in order for the ESPN platform to finally let us lock him in. But we're in. So the question that we have, Norm, is, when are we going to draft?
I think we agreed we're going to do it tomorrow at noon, even though that's not perhaps the most convenient time. I certainly don't want to do it after 9 o'clock one night because I'll be doing it in my sleep,
So Tuesday, September 5th, right?
Correct.
Put that on the screen for everybody at noon Eastern.
So we will be drafting and then hooting and hollering for random teams from various other teams in our fantasy product. I reacquainted myself with Stratomatic Football over the weekend, which is the initial fantasy game prior to computers. I'll save that story for another day. So fantasy football draft tomorrow at noon, and league competition begins Thursday. We will report from time to time on the struggles of the team. I'm a little apprehensive. I haven't played fantasy football ever. I did fantasy baseball a few times a decade or so ago, but I just don't have the time. Mike, how many leagues are you involved in?
Well, I'm not embarrassed to say because it's going to sound like a lot to average person that doesn't play, but this will be, I think, 4 for me. I'm in 2 dynasty leagues every year, so that's something that's part of my life. And then I have a client that has a league, and I love like hanging out and being in a league.
Kick his ass in the league, or is it good client relations?
It's just basically me involved with many of the employees of the company.
Now, suppose that a person who's got a team selected or who's chosen a team can't be there. Will their slot automatically fill?
Yes. So what we like to avoid is auto drafting, just because it's tough to do things that you want to do as someone playing fantasy. But there are already preset rankings within the algorithm for ESPN. So if you're unable to join or you have to drop out early, you will just default to auto draft. But if you're unable to make it tomorrow at noon, do go into your settings. You are able at least to select. You're able to at least tell the algorithm what you want it to prioritize position wise. If you do default to auto drafting, I don't want that to be construed as me saying it's okay. I loathe auto drafting. So if you can help it, please do not auto draft. But yes, it'll automatically fill the roster.
Dawn, we root for Michigan on this page. I'm looking at that note. I realize you're from California and some things need to be explained. This is a Go Blue Wolverines. We bleed maize and blue here. We don't remember Michigan's losses. We celebrate their wins. And by the way, the most winning college football program in American history could keep your head on, Mike. It could well hit the 1,000-win mark this season. I think it's 10 shy of it. So 10 more wins, and it'll be 1,000 wins for Michigan. Who else can say that, Dawn?
Well, I mean, will you guys do like one of those opening drive dances like you did this weekend for old Hardball?
It wasn't an opening drive because on the opening drive, we started on the 2 or 3 yard line. It was in the second series, but it was the train formation. So they all stood next to one another, put their hands up for a 4. And, Dawn is from Wisconsin. Oh, pass the cheese, please. No, Dawn, I'm not going to go there. It's Go Blue, maize and blue. Bum, 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 bum.
Well,
that's what college football is all about.
NU is that Nebraska that we're talking about? NU beat Michigan twice in 95, 96. I say that because I think it would be interesting if Dawn is not a Wisconsin fan and is instead a Nebraska fan. But of the college football teams that we saw perform this weekend, I think Wisconsin's new offense is going to be really good for them. Hate to see their traditional kind of power-eyed thing go away, but you have to adapt.
No, a lot of good football to come this year, and I think the top 10 will be shaken up. Imperious, yeah, you're right. Georgia and Alabama are out there, and the rest of us play catch up. But I'm just not going to concede my right to root for the team of my choice, and I'll support yours as well because that's a First Amendment kind of thing to do.
Well, Norm, with my parting words here, obviously we're live every day at 8 a.m. on Rumble, YouTube, and X. Follow us on X at LawPod Daily. If you're unable to catch us live or just prefer to not look at Norm and my handsome mugs, you can hear audio only on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, Overcast, etc., wherever you find podcasts. And if you're over there, leave us 5 stars or leave us alone. My parting words to you, Norm, are simply go Pack.
Go Blue. We'll see you tomorrow, folks.
Bye.
this.